What's up, my fellow light lover? Today's review covers the Nanlite Pavoslim 240CL. With the release of this 4-foot by 1-foot panel, Nanlite continues their streak of adding great lights to their product lineup. Let's talk about why I'm so excited about the 240CL, touch upon some areas where the light could have been improved, and test the quality and output in both CCT and HSI modes. The Nanlite Pavoslim 240CL is a 260-watt RGBWW 4x1 panel. It comes with a head unit, ballast, power cable, extended header cable, grid, 2 types of diffusion, 2 mounting options, and a ballast clamp. The unit features a CCT range from 2700 Kelvin to 7500 Kelvin with green and magenta adjustment. Intensity is adjustable in 1% increments in all modes. The ballast features 2 knobs and 2 buttons to control a streamlined interface, a fanless design, and 2 V-mount battery slots for use with 14.4 to 26-volt batteries. The 240CL can be operated with 1 or both battery slots occupied, and when switching power between AC and battery power, in case a breaker gets blown or the power goes out, the swap over is instantaneous. Connectivity options include Bluetooth for pairing with the NanLink app, a CRMX chip for those of us with wireless DMX systems, and the cutest little DMX input port on top of the ballast for hardwiring. The head unit is made from a single metal panel. It features a quick release mounting system on the back for the 2 included mounting attachments, a baby pin receiver and a baby pin. These slip in easily to their designated spot on the back of the unit, and there's an audible click when they lock in place. Pulling the tab right here releases the unit. If either of those mounting options won't get the light where you need it to go, there's the option to use any of these 4 threaded receivers located in each of the corners on the back of the head unit. When necessary, the diffusion frame itself can be removed by just unvelcroing it from the unit, and putting it back on is just as easy. Lastly, the unit comes with a 15-foot header cable that features locking connectors between the head unit and ballast. There's quite a few design decisions that went into this product that I'm a big fan of. First up, the fanless design of both the head and ballast means the unit is silent in operation even at 100%. Despite its relatively large size and the all-metal construction of the backing plate, the head unit only weighs 10 pounds with the diffusion frame and grid on. This relatively low weight to size ratio means the 240CL can easily be rigged overhead or boomed safely in on a menace arm. The pop-up style diffusion on the head unit is probably the best way that any company has implemented diffusion to a panel light like this that we've seen so far. This design means the 240CL is basically ready within seconds from being taken out of the case. It just needs to be unvelcroed on either side. And to get really crazy, the setup time can be decreased further by literally just leaving everything plugged in when the unit and ballast are put back in the case. The provided grid slips on easily, reduces the spread of the beam angle, controls the light from unwanted spilling, and, importantly, doesn't have any sag in the middle. The baby pin receiver mounting accessory has a handle on it to make repositioning the light much easier. Without this idea, we would have had to just kind of manhandle the light, so I'm glad that they thought of this. And lastly, the individual LEDs have a dome over them, and I think this benefits the output in 2 ways. First, they help focus the light emitted from the LEDs, which pushes more light forward rather than to the sides, which increases the output of the unit. And second, it appears that these domes may also help with blending the colors emitted by the RGB diodes. See here how the red and blue LEDs are active, but the dome appears to blend them into a purple hue. I'll be honest, this section's pretty short, and there's so much that I like about the Pavoslim 240CL that I need to remind myself that it's a Nanlite and not a Nanlux product, because the things that I'd like to nitpick are features brands usually reserve for their more professional units. First off, the header cable is made of a more inexpensive lining. meaning that it could melt if it ends up resting against something with a bit of heat to it. Really, my biggest complaint is that despite how linearly the light dims, it doesn't dim in 0.1% increments. As a result of this, the output at 1% could still be too bright in some locations when operated in CCT mode. Switching to 0.1% intensity increments would also increase fidelity to the output at intensity levels between 1 and 5%. Also, the green magenta adjustment being set to a max of 150 in either direction feels kind of arbitrary to me. This maximum adjustment level also doesn't correspond to any filmmaking standards like DUV or green magenta color correction gel strengths. Besides these three things though, there really isn't much that I don't like about the form factor of this night. Nanlite did a phenomenal job at designing not only the 240CL, but their entire Pavoslim lineup. All right, let's dig into the most important part of any light review, covering the output quality. We'll start with two graphs that help us understand how the light performs in CCT mode. Then we'll switch over to HSI mode to understand how evenly this light covers its color gamut. Lastly, we'll measure the output in a few ways, as well as look at the SSI and TM30 scores. First on the chopping block, let's see how accurately the Nanlite Pavoslim 240CL stays at 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin throughout its intensity range. Beginning with the results at 5600 Kelvin, this is the one area that I wish this light performed better in. We can see that at 100% intensity, the light begins within 100 Kelvin of 5600 Kelvin, which is pretty good and definitely within tolerance. But as we decrease intensity from 100% down to 5%, the color temperature output decreases by another 250 Kelvin to nearly 5250 Kelvin, which is noticeably warmer than our daylight standard reference. The axis on the right describes how much magenta green shift the light has, and the Pavoslim 240CL does wonderfully here. A DUV shift between 0.001 and 0.0015 towards green is not even noticeable to the average human. When looking at the 3200 Kelvin graph, we can see the 240CL measured about 100 Kelvin below the target throughout the intensity spectrum. The green magenta shift here is even more accurate to the standard target, consistently staying within 0.0005 units of zero. This next graph shows us how well the Pavoslim 240CL follows the TM30 reference curve, which is the standard color temperature curve in cinema. The light does a fairly good job at tracking this reference standard, staying within a 1/8 color correction gel from 2700 Kelvin all the way to 7000 Kelvin. The crossover from green to magenta tint happening between 4000 and 5000 Kelvin is because this light doesn't try to track the TM30 reference curve, which is the newest color temperature standard. Nanlite engineers tracked the Planckian curve when programming this unit, which is an older color temperature standard. When I place this black body reference curve over our existing graph, we can see that the Pavoslim 240CL does remarkable when it is tested against the standard that it was programmed to follow. The data line being shifted to the right of the standard line indicates that the Pavoslim 240CL tested warmer than the dialed-in color temperature along the entire color temperature range. This result correlates with the warm CCT shift seen in both of the previous graphs. The color temperature curve of the Pavoslim 240CL remains relatively consistent as intensity is reduced from 100% to 75% to 50% and 25%. If you're curious to learn more about color temperature, how I derived any of these graphs, and why I just called the Planckian curve old news, click the link in the description to watch my in-depth primer on the color science of film lighting. All right, let's swap out of CCT mode and over to HSI so that we can see how the Pavoslim 240CL performs when outputting colors. This first graph shows us the relationship between outputted color and the chosen hue value. The hue degree value is adjusted from 0 to 355 degrees in 5-degree increments and tested at a saturation and intensity levels of 100%. A relatively even distribution like this is a great result for the Pavoslim 240CL. An even spread indicates a strong linear relationship between the hue degree value and the color that's being cast, which means that a user should be able to dial in the color they want with relative ease when at max saturation. If we measure the Pavoslim 240CL in 30-degree hue value increments and at saturation levels of 100, 75, and 50%, we end up with this graph showcasing the relationships between hue selection, saturation, and color output. This is another area that the Pavoslim scores very strongly. The consistently spaced movement for each hue between 100, 75, and 50% saturation suggests that the saturation level of the hue being cast has a strong correlation with the saturation knob itself. This linear correlation between the two is further supported by the relatively similar distances between 100 to 50% saturation and 50 to 0% saturation for each hue. If anything, this light could have desaturated a little less between 100 and 50%, which would have increased fidelity slightly in this region, where we're probably more likely to use a light when in HSI mode anyways. This graph remained relatively consistent as intensity is lowered from 100% to 75 to 50 and down to 25%. Love to see this result. Another way to look at the previous data is to group the measurements by saturation level instead of intensity. Much like the first graph showed us how well the Pavoslim stayed at the reference targets in CCT mode as intensity was lowered, this diagram illustrates the consistency in HSI mode of the outputted color as intensity is adjusted from 100 to 75 to 50 to 25%. At 100% saturation, the Pavoslim 240CL could have remained a little more consistent. The spread of the majority of these hue measurements indicates that the hue will change slightly with the intensity level. As saturation is lowered from 75 to 50%, we can see the apparent spread to each hue becomes more constrained. Lastly, let's look at how linear the correlation is between the intensity knob and the output in CCT mode for the Nanlite Pavoslim 240CL. Another graph, another area that the Pavoslim 240CL scored extremely well. Between the graph and the measured values here on the left, we can see this light doubles the measured output whenever the intensity level is doubled anywhere along the intensity spectrum. And it does this at both 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin. A perfectly linear correlation like this means that when we need to reduce biostop, we can just cut the intensity in half without even thinking about it. Same thing to bring the light up a stop, just double the intensity. At 5600 Kelvin, the Nanlite Pavoslim 240CL produced an SSI score of 75 and a TM30 RF score of 95. At 3200 Kelvin, the light produced an SSI score of 86 and a TM30 RF value of 94. I know. These last few releases from Nanlite have me sounding like a bit of a fanboy for them. And if they continue to put out great releases like the Pavoslim 240CL here, then that trend is going to continue. If you don't mind the slightly warm shift in CCT mode, then I definitely recommend adding this light to your kit. The 240CL works perfectly as a hair light. It's a great kicker for somebody standing up. I'm currently using it as a key light for this video. Place one of these on either side of a green screen to turn that setup into easy mode. And then those same two panels could be used as cross keys for a two-person interview in a low ceiling room. I could go on, but you get the point. A light in this form factor has a lot of use cases, and I'm happy to see Nanlite nail this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.